welcome to GLCast, the official podcast of GLProUK. GLProUK is a London-based creative studio working with a diverse range of companies, individuals and brands across multiple platforms to provide a wraparound service for all your digital content creation requirements. My name is Greg Armstrong. I'm Head of Digital Marketing here at GLProUK and I'm joined by Managing Director Jay Ludgrove. This episode we kick off a How to Start a Podcast series discussing the blogs of the same title. This first episode is entitled Brand, Show, Structure and Music. You want to start a podcast. You have a topic or an idea in mind, but you're not sure what you do next. But before you go any further and you start buying all equipment if you don't already have it, setting up hosting sites and your social media, the first thing I believe you should do is start with your brand.
Sure.
The planting of the seed, your name. What is the name for your podcast? I can find that be the trickiest part. Because it's very easy to go with a pun or a phrase. But now, as we've mentioned previously, with podcasts becoming a lot bigger and the pool getting a lot more wider or crammed, finding a really good name is hard.
Especially one that hasn't been used already. One of the things we always tell people when they've because everyone's got a great idea for the name of the podcast is have you looked?
Yeah.
Go out now and look in the public domain and see if it's been used before.
Yeah.
Check on iTunes, check on elsewhere to see if it's another podcast or is it another thing?
Yeah.
Is it a vlog? Is it on YouTube? Is it something else? Is it someone's social media channel? Right?
Yeah.
Go out and have a little look. Have a big look.
Have a big look. Because there are a lot of podcasts out there that do have the same name.
Sure.
I mean, for example, off the top of my head, if I was going to say a podcast like Smorgasbord, I remember a few years ago a friend of me coming to me with an idea of a podcast and him being like, I've got a great name for it. And I was like, okay. He explained to me why he chose it, all the different foods, pretty much a buffet. Cool. And I was like, wow, that's cool. But then it wasn't until after it kind of came out and I was like, God, there's so many podcasts called this.
There?
So many called it.
Well, and everyone's, especially in the States, everyone's got a podcast.
Yeah.
There's so many.
Oh, and then they've got a few more years on us, for example.
Very much so.
Sometimes you can just go with your name, like the Greg Armstrong podcast. You could easily that. Sounds like a great name for a podcast.
Doesn't it?
Maybe I'll take that. Copyright that before there's more Greg Armstrongs popping up. So you've got to be really, really think about your name and commit to it. And once you commit to that name, write it down. Don't forget it. Get your artwork alongside it.
Absolutely. Well,
artwork's a huge thing as well.
Yeah, and if you're going to get this right, you're going to want to put everything in place to make sure that you can, really have a brand.
Yes.
If you're going to, if this is more than just a hobbyist podcast, you want to think about it across the board. So when you're thinking of that name, you want to make sure that it's completely individual,
yes.
And it's specific just to yourselves. But also you want to make sure it's not used by anyone else because that's going to be a pain in the backside.
I don't know if universal is the right word here, but it's safe in a sense that it's not going to get filtered for being maybe not potentially rude, but you need to make sure it's a safe name that will appear on all platforms and not get cut out. If it has, close to rude word in it, iTunes aren't going to pull it up or they're going to block out certain letters and you don't want that.
It's a very good point. We've had it in the past where we're trying to boost a post, but unfortunately it used, not even necessarily
like the word arse.
Yeah.
Or ass.
Ass, it was, wasn't it? Yeah.
It was the word ass.
And because of that, we literally couldn't then post it out onto social media.
No.
Facebook wouldn't allow us to push that out.
Yeah.
The other thing to think about as well when you're picking a name is not only something which, could offend, but also, what is the podcast going to be the business, or is it something bigger, or is it something smaller? Because you want to think about the SEO, the search engine optimization of that name.
Yes.
You really want to think about when people are looking for something like your podcast, are they going to find it because of the name? If the answer is yes, that's good SEO. In a nutshell.
It is, yeah. There's an argument to be had, and I see this debate a lot on podcast Facebook groups, is that people debate whether the name should be short or long. Now, me and you, when we first met, our podcasts both have long names.
That's a good point, really long names.
Really long names compared to some podcasts I see now. And that is, I see a debate happening quite a lot. Should it be a one word or a couple of words? Or should it be 5-6 words long? I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to that, because when we're talking about SEO, surely more words is better?
Yeah, absolutely. And then I guess that the argument for a shorter name is with regards to social media. You don't want to be typing in a 15, 30 character name. And you probably can't do a 30 character name for, say, Twitter or something like that. But, it's going to get more and more difficult. And, saying it at the end is going to be a real a pain as well, which you don't necessarily want to do. You want to make it easy to push out across the board as well.
You also got to think further down the line, if you are looking to get sponsorship or monetize this, is make sure your name is appropriate for that, if that is the end goal.
Yeah, the last thing you want to do is really start getting some momentum going and then have to go back and change your name because it's used elsewhere. Someone else has the copyright to it, or it's not appropriate really for your audience or sponsors. You don't want to have a name where people love the content, love the audience, you get great reach. But we can't use your name.
We can't mention that name
because
with
it's
our
offensive
brand
to our audience. Exactly.
That's a really good point.
And it's a problem because you also really want to make your name to stand out.
Yeah.
As much everything we're saying here could end up with a really bland sort of beige generic name.
It's true. Yeah.
You don't want that. So
there's a middle ground you got to find.
There really is. There's a balancing point in between finding something kind of. I sound like an old person, but something edgy or something cool, what
all the cool kids are doing. Yeah.
Exactly, right? But at the same point, not so cool that it's going to get in your way.
That's a good point. And also, alongside the name, as mentioned briefly earlier, the artwork. The artwork, no doubt, your first draft of your artwork that you do put out, at some point down the line, might be a year or so, you will eventually change it. It's progression. It happens.
Sure.
But just to get started, make sure the artwork you have is what you want it to be, because that's what people are first going to see.
Right, so when you're saying artwork, are you talking about the logo?
Logo, I mean, some people kind of have, their logo is also some imagery of them, or cartoon drawing, or anything along those lines. Well, I'm saying probably the box that would appear as your Facebook profile picture or your thumbnail on iTunes. Mm-hmm. So for me, my logo is my artwork.
Right.
Unless you're doing episode artwork, I'm talking about your brand.
That's what I mean. Yeah. Okay. So you're actually talking about the logo of your brand, like the logo of the podcast, the kind of thing which will be on every episode,
exactly,
no matter what. So that, it's something recognizable.
Right. Exactly. Because not all RSS feeds or hosting sites will change your artwork individually. Some don't. Some just have, by default, your brand logo.
Right, okay.
So you've got to bear that in mind, because that's what people are going to see when they come to your episode on certain platforms.
So an interesting point here about that kind of artwork is you have to think that it's going to be very small.
Yes.
Right, it's going to be really dinky. It's a technical term.
Yeah, it is. That's what we use it all the time here.
Can we dinkify that more?
Yeah.
The actual image isn't huge when you're looking on a podcast app, when you're looking at something like that. It isn't that big, so you want to make it recognizable from a distance. It doesn't want to have too many words on it. It wants to be something that you can just kind of glance at and see and know it's that. But at the same point, it does want to be interesting. It can't just be a generic stamp of the name of the podcast.
100%. So when you've kind of found this, when you have your idea, you've got your name, you've got your artwork / logo. You now need to think about how your show is going to come across. How are you going to structure it? Are you a sit down, hit record, and that's the podcast?
Sure.
Or are you a pre-recorded intro that you'll use the same time over and over again? Hi, welcome to the show. This is about this. And then maybe you cut to a secondary intro where you then talk about the guest or
introduce the actual episode itself.
Sure. You need to make these decisions early on, because there's a lot of prep work to be done for that. So if you're just going to do sit down and hit record, great, fine. You still need your guidance for what you're going to talk about. But are you going to do, if you're going to do pre-done intros and outros, you need to record those and know what you're going to say.
Sure.
And it has to be nailed, because you're going to keep using this over and over again.
Yeah.
And again, I say a few years down the line, you might get better equipment and redo the whole thing. That's fine, but you need to get to that point first.
Yeah, or are you not going to have something that's pre-recorded? Are you going to have a pre-written script, which you say every single time? My previous podcast, I had a whole thing which I said every single time, and I got good at it.
Yeah.
After quite a few episodes, but it was a real mouthful. And I hear other podcasters get to the point, once you're 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the line, maybe you don't really want to necessarily be saying the same words over and over again or the same sentence.
It was strange for me that when I joined GLPro, started looking at a business podcast or just other people's podcasts that we were doing for them, I'd never really come across or really noticed the structure of a podcast, because for me, I just sit down and hit record. But it was the first time I really became aware of the work behind piecing an episode together. It was like an audio jigsaw. And I was kind of like, wow, there's an intro, then there's an intro segment of them talking, followed by another segment of them introducing the guest. Then there's the then there's the podcast. Then there's the end wrap-up outro, and some maybe an advert or something to go on the end.
Totally.
And it kind of blew my mind that this podcast could have, up to like 7 different pieces that you line up.
Like segments almost put
segments
together.
to put all together. And at the end of that, it needs to all flow and be the right sound and level and be the same.
Yeah.
And that really blew my mind, the work behind it. And I'm not saying that I didn't work on my own one, but mine was literally sit down and press record.
Sure. But there's a beauty to podcasts like that.
Yeah.
There's a beauty
absolutely.
to podcasts when it's just hit record. But if you are building your podcast from day one, where it's going to be looking at things like monetization and sponsorship, then you want to think about those kind of things and where they'll fit. If you are going to have that pre-recorded intro in the beginning, well, where would you put your advert?
Yeah.
So, if you do start working with a sponsor, they're probably going to want some time at the beginning. Depending on how your show's set up, would an advert in the middle work?
Yeah.
Is an advert at the end as attractive for a sponsor?
No, yeah.
As opposed to, having it up front and center. And as a rule, it seems to be most sponsors and advertisers really want to be at the beginning. They want a 30-second ad at the beginning before your podcast starts, because that's when you have the listener's attention.
Depends on length as well. So in my experience, in previous sponsorships, it's been a mention at the beginning and a mention in the middle, depending on the length of the podcast.
Sure.
And I'm talking like an hour plus. Not all podcasts are that long.
No.
But what we're saying is, with this in mind, is that because if you're coming to podcasting now, it's already so big and vast that you do have to think more carefully about the structure of your show to what's already happening out there. Because now the audience, they know podcasts better now. They're more trained. They know, they can hear what's going behind it. And there's a level of expectation, especially if, again, you're looking to monetize or do this for a business. There's a level of expectation for a podcast now. And you kind of need to achieve that early on, hence more planning. It's not as simple just to sit down now and hit record and pull it out. I mean, you can do it that way, but you need to think of your plan.
Yeah, absolutely. You really do. You really, really do. And a big part of that intro and outro is going to be the music.
Which is the next point on here, is the music. And it's like, do you have your little jingles, or, is it a podcast that is going to have jingles, or is it a podcast going to have one theme?
Yeah.
You need to make a big thing about your music, because what music are you going to use?
And what's your podcast about?
Yeah.
Like, what is it? Is it a motivational podcast? Does the song need to be like big and upbeat? Is it an interview podcast where, it needs to be more docile, or docile, sorry, docile.
I was thinking that's a nice use of the word there.
Thank you. I said it wrong. What is the feel of your podcast going to be? Because chances are, much like that intro, people are going to associate that with the brand, just like the advertising. The song is going to come to be something specific as well. It makes us lean into an ugly side of putting a podcast together, which is music licensing.
Copyright.
So I see it tons of times, all the time on different Facebook groups.
Can we use this song? No, because that song's really famous.
Yeah. More importantly, do you own it?
Yeah.
I'm only going to use 15 seconds of it. Okay.
So,
but do you own those 15 seconds? And I've been a musician for years. We run studios. I hate the idea of the fact that people seem to think it's okay to take someone's music.
Yeah.
Because ultimately it isn't.
No.
Right. It really, really isn't. Thankfully, platforms like YouTube have actually put algorithms in place where they will find out and listen to the music you use, and if you don't have the copyright or if you don't have the access to use it, it will just pull your episode.
Yeah.
It will literally just pull it from it. So there is actually a more than just ethical and good reason, moral reason.
Yeah. You actually physically can't always use it now.
That's right. And you want your podcast to be everywhere. You don't want to say, my podcast isn't on YouTube. Why? Oh, because I use this track. So when you're going out to find music, you have to find places where you can find licensable music. And I'm sorry, but that is going to probably mean one of two things.
Yes.
One is you're going to find a Creative Commons license.
Yep.
And what that basically means is the track is out there to be used, but the person who wrote that track wants to be credited for it.
Yeah.
So you're going to have to mention them in your show notes for every single episode without fail.
Yeah.
every episode. You're going to have to
100%.
say thank you to whoever. For
J Beats. Thank you, J
Thank
Beats,
you.
for making this tune. This tune I found on YouTube.
That's right. And, and you have to, it's their song.
Yeah.
It's their thing. It's their property. When it really gets my goat when people say, oh, can't we, but I'm only using a little bit of it. Well, why don't you just go and steal a little something from the house? Like, I'm only stealing the strings off your guitar.
Only a couple of slices of bread from your loaf. It's fine.
This is it. It's okay. I'm only taking like one of the rings you own. Well, it's not cool, right? It's exactly the same thing with using a part of someone's song that you're not licensed to. So the one side of it and the free side is Creative Commons, and like I say, there's tons of sites where you can go out and find tracks which writers have put up there, specifically, or composers have put up specifically to be used, but all they want is a bit of credit.
Yeah.
The other way is you have to find licensable music. So you have to go out and purchase music which can be used. And you have to be, again, really, really careful here, because where is your podcast going to be used? If it's only going to be used on the internet, I say only the internet.
Yeah,
but
podcasting.
That is a point, though. If your show then gets syndicated and you want to then use it on radio, you will not be able to use the same licensed music, right? So check out the licenses for music when you're buying it and see where it can be used. And be mindful of that fact, because if it is only used for internet use and internet publication, then that is literally the only place you can use it. And quite frankly, if you want to use it for broadcast, it's going to cost an awful lot more money.
Yeah.
It's
And
as simple
if you
as
do
that.
take a song that you haven't got the license to use, or you have just taken a snippet of a mainstream song, and again, you do get sponsorship down the line, you will have to change that.
Yes.
So you need to make the decision before you even record to know what you're going to use.
And will that affect your brand?
Yeah.
If you then get to the point where you're getting sponsorship, it's monetized, fantastic. Oh, I can't use that song anymore.
Yeah.
Is that going to affect your brand? Are people going to be like, ugh? But hopefully your podcast is good enough that simply changing the music isn't going to affect it.
There is obviously another way to music, which a lot of podcasts do at the start. I did it at the start, and it did end up changing it. It's something like Apple Loops. Okay. You can kind of make your own theme, but with something like Apple Loops, and a lot of podcasts do it, which is the reason I changed my podcast theme after a few episodes. I think about 20 episodes in, I had to change the theme.
Yep.
Because it was from Apple Loops, and I tinkered with it a little bit. But at the end of the day, I started hearing it on so many other podcasts.
Oh, really?
And I saw it on YouTube. It was on a Kevin Smith video. I was like, I use this tune. Damn it. Like, all of a sudden.
Damn you, Kevin Smith.
This tune was popping up on so many other videos and podcasts. And people used to say to me all the time, I love the theme tune. The theme tune's great. And I was like, cool, I didn't make it. I'm just using it from Apple Loops. But when I started hearing it, and people were saying, I heard them use your theme on blah, blah, blah. I was like, right, you know what? I'm going to change this now.
Because it's not your theme.
No, because it's not my theme.
But that's the whole problem you're saying there is that you can use that, and that is...
But it's not always going to be a long-lasting answer.
No.
I did have a long-lasting answer in the sense that a good friend of mine was a great musician, so he made me a theme.
So I guess that's the third option.
Yeah.
So those places where we're talking about essentially buying stock music, depending on what you pay, you may then run into the same problem Greg's had, right? Because if you're buying a track, there's, for instance, Shutterstock Music, where I think it's like $34 or so to buy a track. Great, and it's licensable, and that's fantastic. But you can buy it, I can buy it, anyone can buy it. So much like the problem you had there with the loops, and the problem is the stock sites is a lot of the music. If you're not paying much, if you're paying like $34, it's not great.
No,
Like,
it's not great.
You're going to have to scroll through it to find, there's a lot of like lift music, there's a lot of elevator tunes.
100%.
So you're going to have to scroll through an awful lot of it to find a great track. And guess what? Other people are doing the same thing.
These iStock style musics, they're not made to be leading pieces of music. These are like accompanying music for video or something you're putting together. It's not meant to be the main part.
No.
And if you're using it as the one thing they're hearing when your podcast start, you're going to find it really hard to find a really engaging tune that probably really reflects your personality and your brand and your show.
Now, if you spend more, you will get better stock.
Yes.
There's sites like Audio Blocks,
Yeah.
which are really cool. And, you can then spend, say, £100, £200 on a track. And they're significantly better tracks. And they're written... by artists, probably a little bit more professional artists. They're not necessarily just throwing out loads of stock tracks.
Yeah,
this is one of their songs. But at the same point, it still isn't necessarily going to be individual to your podcast. So I love what you did. I think that's absolutely the way to go. Is essentially get something written for you. But if you don't know someone, and if you don't have someone who can write and record a track for you, it can be a very expensive deal.
100%.
Very, very expensive deal, because essentially what you're asking an artist to do is give away the rights to their music, or sell you the rights to their music. As we said at the very beginning of this whole music conversation, is do you own it? So if you're going to get someone to go out and compose a track, write a track, record a track, and then sell you the rights to use that track, so it is individual to you and your podcast alone, you're going to have to dig deep.
I mean, as you can tell from the way we're talking about it, this is a conversation we have over and over again, not even just a podcast, but for video and etc. We have this conversation all the time because it's a bit of a minefield when it comes to music and licensing.
Well, and the shame is we end up educating people on this a lot, because we speak with clients and they're like, oh, can't we just use this track?
Yeah,
can't we just use?
No, because that's number one on the charts right now.
Yeah, exactly.
We can't use Beyonce.
No, that's right, and especially like the fitness industry is terrible for it. When we've worked with fitness brands,
Eye the tiger,
exactly. Well, sure, but they'll literally say, but other people are using this.
Yeah.
And yes, you are right. People are posting videos using other people's tracks. The difference is, if you start making any money, and here's where it gets real.
Listen up.
If you start making any money from your vlog or your podcast using someone else's track, the writer of that track, will make the money.
Yes.
So if you get 1 million hits on YouTube because you've got a great video, just a fantastic video that you've made and you've put it together, but you put it to Eye of the Tiger,
yep,
right? Then the writer of Eye of a Tiger gets every penny, or pretty much every penny, a lion's share of that money. So don't do it.
Yeah.
And you know what? They deserve it. They wrote that track.
Yeah.
You stole that track and they used it.
Save yourself the hassle.
That's right.
So we've kind of broken it down there. So once you have your show structure in place, your music, all this is the structure. Your music, your brand, your logo, the way your show's going to lay out. Once you have all that in place, it gives you a much easier plan to edit your episodes. You can work out the initial time it takes for your podcast to be put together. And it makes a big difference to the quality of the launch.
And the content you release.
And the content
if you actually have a plan, as much as and listen, I love your podcast, so I'm not digging it out, but it's difficult to get something great from just recording.
Yeah,
how often from those early episodes that you recorded did you have to edit heavily to find the gold? So
heavily,
right? And you guys have obviously clearly gotten really good at it as time goes on. So now you can just hit record.
And at the beginning, I would sit there with not a script, but close to a script in front of me, loads of it.
That's right.
Now I don't really have anything in front of me when I'm doing that. So I know what we're going to do.
Yeah.
But yeah, at the beginning, absolutely. I had a whole plan in front of me.
But having that plan helps so much. When I started our podcast, it was an interview podcast, and I'd really do some research into people. As time went on, and I got better at interviewing, I found I didn't need to do that, and actually it was detrimental. But originally to get good content from day one, we really thought about what it was going to be and tried to make sure that we had a plan going into it, and it made the edit easier, it made the content better, and it meant that we kind of hit the ground running from day one.
Oh man, you read an interview podcast from the get-go, that takes a lot of planning.
It did.
It really does.
It did, but what the funny thing was that we found was that actually, if you research people too much, you then just ask the questions that is information out there.
Absolutely,
so we, and that's something we learned. So I think actually that's quite important for what we're talking about here, is when you are building this structure and thinking about it before launching your podcast. As much as we're saying think hard, don't think too much, okay? Because you want, one of the nice things about a podcast is it does evolve. So don't necessarily put yourself or build that structure in such a tight, restricted way that you're not going to be able to let the podcast evolve naturally.
100%. Okay, I'll say that wraps up that first part of how to start a podcast. Join us on the next episode where we'll be talking about hosting sites, the dreaded RSS feed, and social media. That's right, we'll eventually get to actually sitting down and recording, but this is what we're saying, there's a lot to get right before you get to that point. Thank you for listening to GLCast, the official podcast of GLProUK. Be sure to follow us on Twitter and Facebook at GLProUK and find us on our LinkedIn page. Thank you.